$100 million, laundered through a shoe store, not a bank, not a licensed money transmitter. A retail business in El Paso, Texas, selling shoes and goods to customers on both sides of the border, that prosecutors say became the engine of one of the largest trade-based money laundering schemes ever charged in that district. 8 years, millions in bribes to Mexican customs officials, and a mechanism so simple it barely needs a diagram. Goods instead of wires, invoices instead of transfers. I'm a CAM-certified financial crime investigator with over a decade in this field. The first 2 cases in this series were licensed money transmitters, MoneyGram, Western Union, companies that had compliance programs and still failed. This one is different, and arguably more relevant if you operate anywhere near the border. A business that was never registered as a money transmitter at all, functioning as one anyway. Here's exactly how the Black Market Peso Exchange works, and why it's the mechanism every MSB near the border needs to be able to recognize in a counterparty. The Black Market Peso Exchange exists to solve one problem for a drug trafficking organization. They have piles of US dollars sitting in the United States, and moving that physical cash across the border in bulk is one of the riskiest, most detectable steps in the entire operation. Every dollar smuggled south in a vehicle or a body cavity is a dollar that can get seized at a checkpoint. The BMPE solves this without moving a single bill across the border. A peso broker in Mexico buys those US drug dollars from the cartel at a discount, paying in clean pesos, no smuggling required. The broker now controls dirty US dollars sitting in accounts inside the United States. To turn those dollars into something usable, the broker sells them to Mexican business owners who need US dollars to buy American goods for import. Except in a functioning BMPE scheme, those goods get smuggled back into Mexico without paying Mexican import tariffs, duties, or fees, which makes the US dollars worth even more to the Mexican business owner than face value. Everyone in the chain profits except the government, collecting nothing on either side. That's the model prosecutors say Jose Luis Rodriguez ran through ERENE, Incorporated, an El Paso business that did business as J&E Sports and sold shoes and other goods to customers in the U.S. and Mexico. According to the Department of Justice, from March 6, 2006 to November 2014, nearly 9 years, Rodriguez and others conspired to launder proceeds tied to smuggling millions of dollars worth of goods into Mexico without paying the tariffs, duties, and fees the Mexican government required. This is trade-based money laundering in its classic form. Instead of moving suspicious wire transfers that a bank's monitoring system might flag, value moves as physical merchandise, disguised in ordinary-looking invoices for a legitimate product line. A shoe shipment doesn't trigger a currency transaction report. A pallet of goods crossing a bridge doesn't look like a financial transaction at all, even though functionally that's exactly what it is. To keep the pipeline running, prosecutors say more than an estimated $2.3 million in bribes were paid to Mexican customs officials between 2012 and 2014 alone, payments that ensured the smuggled goods moved across the border without the tariffs and duties that would have made the entire scheme unprofitable. That's the detail that separates a genuine trade-based laundering operation from ordinary sloppy customs paperwork. The bribes existed specifically because the business model only worked if Mexican officials looked the other way on value that should have been taxed. Rodriguez was charged, went to trial, and on August 27, 2015, the 4th day of his federal jury trial, pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to commit money laundering rather than let the case go to a verdict. Here's the part that matters most for anyone who actually runs a registered money services business. What Rodriguez operated was, functionally, a money transmitting business. He was accepting one form of value, drug proceeds converted through peso brokers, and delivering a different form of value on the other side of the border, for a fee built into the exchange rate and the tariff avoidance. That is the textbook definition of money transmission under the Bank Secrecy Act's regulatory framework. It was never registered with FinCEN. It never filed a single currency transaction report. It never built a customer identification program. This is the same underlying violation, operating an unlicensed money services business that anchored one of the 3 federal charges against Binance in an earlier video in this series. The scale and sophistication were different. The core regulatory failure was identical: providing money transmission services without registering as an MSB and without the reporting infrastructure that registration requires. That distinction matters because it tells you where the actual enforcement risk sits if you run a licensed MSB near the border. You are not competing on a level playing field with businesses like ERENE. You carry registration costs, reporting obligations, and compliance overhead that an unregistered trade-based laundering operation simply skips. The regulatory exposure isn't just, am I registered and filing correctly? It's whether your own legitimate operation is being used, wittingly or not, as a layer inside a BMPE-style scheme run by someone else. It's also worth noting how this case was actually built, because it tells you what investigators look for. Trade-based laundering doesn't leave the same paper trail as a wire transfer. There's no SWIFT message, no bank compliance officer reviewing the transaction in real time. What it does leave is a customs and import-export paper trail, declared values that don't match market prices, shipment volumes inconsistent with a business's stated size, and a pattern of the same counterparties transacting repeatedly at values just under what would trigger additional scrutiny. Those records took years to assemble into a prosecutable case, specifically because trade-based schemes are built to look like ordinary commerce, until someone cross-references the customs declarations against the actual goods and actual bank activity. Rodriguez was sentenced on February 4, 2016 by U.S. District Judge David C. Guadarrama to 121 months in federal prison, just over 10 years, for a scheme prosecutors estimated moved $100 million in value. Beyond the prison term, the court ordered a $10,000 fine, 3 years of supervised release following his sentence, forfeiture of real property at 600 South Stanton Street in El Paso, and forfeiture of approximately $650,000 in U.S. currency, seized directly from his bank accounts, on top of more than $1 million in seized merchandise from the investigation. 10 years for a shoe business. That's the number worth sitting with, because it's a reminder that trade-based money laundering charges carry the same weight as any other BSA violation once the pattern is established. The absence of a bank wire doesn't make the underlying conduct any less prosecutable. If your MSB operates anywhere along the southwest border corridor, this case is a direct map of the red flags your own program needs to catch. Not in your own books, necessarily, but in the customers and counterparties you're doing business with. A customer or business relationship that involves consistent, high-volume cross-border trade, combined with cash-intensive deposits that don't obviously match the business's stated volume, is exactly the shape of a BMPE-adjacent relationship. Structured money order deposits from geographically dispersed senders, invoices that don't match declared customs values, and counterparties who seem unusually insistent on cash or near-cash settlement over normal banking channels are the practical, testable red flags underneath this case. FinCEN has specifically flagged border region MSBs for heightened scrutiny in recent years, including lowered currency transaction reporting thresholds in designated border zip codes, precisely because this typology remains active. If your program hasn't been tested against trade-based laundering red flags specifically, not just structuring and wire fraud, but goods-based value transfer, that's a real gap. And it's the kind of gap a functioning MSB compliance program should be built to catch before a customer relationship becomes a federal case with your business's name in the indictment. 3 cases now in this series. 2 licensed money transmitters that had compliance programs and still failed to catch what their own agents and monitoring systems should have surfaced. 1 unlicensed operation, dressed as a shoe store, that never had a compliance program at all, and ran for nearly a decade before the sentence came down. Different starting points, same underlying lesson. The failure that gets you into federal court is rarely a total absence of any controls. It's controls that don't actually test for the specific typology moving through your business or your customer base. I'm a CAMS-certified financial crime investigator with over 12 years in this field, and I built fourth pillar compliance to test exactly these gaps before a regulator or a prosecutor does. Program reviews, red flag testing specifically calibrated to border and cross-border typologies, and interim BSA-officer support. I left the same free red flags checklist in the description. If you want to understand how these cases actually get built, not the headline, the mechanics, subscribe. Educational only, not legal advice. Everything here from public court filings and regulator press releases. I'll see you in the next one.